2 hours after we buried my father, a sealed envelope arrived, stamped by the police evidence room and signed in his hand. It didn't name a suspect. It told me where to look, behind his shoulder in a single photograph. The man standing there once saved my life. Tonight, he might have ended my father's. If you think this is a story about grief, it isn't. It's about what a dead man can still say, and what someone will kill to keep quiet. Rain stitched thin lines across the black umbrellas until the last one folded and the cemetery emptied. I stayed. The ground gave a dull, heavy sound as each spade of earth struck the lid. My father had always said the world tells the truth if you listen to small noises. Shovel. Breath. Distant traffic. The kinds of sounds you only hear when a voice you love is gone. When I finally stepped away from the grave, the mud held on to my heels like it had a right to. I didn't fight it. I let the earth keep a little of me, the way it had just kept all of him. The house smelled like cedar and old coffee. His jacket still hung on the hook by the door, one sleeve turned wrong side out from being shrugged off in a hurry. I touched it with 2 fingers like it might bruise if I gripped too hard. My phone buzzed before the quiet could settle. A man in a dark windbreaker stood on the porch, rain speckling his glasses. He held a small, flat parcel against his chest with the kind of care people reserve for breakable truths. Special delivery, he said. Signature required. Chain of custody item. He showed me a laminated card. The seal on the parcel was not a brand logo, not a store. It was the seal of the State Bureau of Investigation, the kind they put on evidence bags. Beneath it, in my father's hand, was my name, Anna. The courier held out a clipboard. My fingers left a wet arc of rainwater on the form where I signed. The envelope was a tired shade of manila, edges softened by travel. A barcode label ran along the side with a string of numbers that meant something to someone, somewhere. There was a round purple postmark crossed by a black line, 2 months old. The return address wasn't a person. It was a place, evidence storage, State Bureau Annex. My father had mailed me something and it had been detained like a suspect. Whatever he was trying to send couldn't take the straight road to my door. It had to pass through a room full of gray shelves, through rules, through hands that log things so they aren't lost. And then it came here, 2 hours after the dirt took him. I set the envelope on the kitchen table and ran a butter knife under the flap, careful not to tear the seal any more than I had to. There was one sheet inside, folded in thirds with the precision of someone who knows how many ways paper can talk. No legal language. No long explanation. Just a line in his hand, firm where he meant it, faltering where he must have been tired. Look at my last photograph. Behind my shoulder. Watch him. No name. No accusation. A map with only one landmark. The words pulled the air tight in my chest. My mind went to the hallway without asking me first. To the frame with the scuffed corner, the one that always hung a little crooked because my father said things should have a little lean so you noticed them. I carried the note with me like it could evaporate if I set it down. In the hallway, the photo waited where it had always been, my father in a blue dress shirt at the precinct's anniversary dinner, eyes bright, a cake in front of him the color of cheap icing. People stood clustered around, heads turned towards something funny someone had just said. Behind my father's shoulder, a man leaned in, half in the frame, a blur of a smile that never reached his eyes. Michael Hart. He wasn't a stranger dropped in by a twist of fate. He was the man who had pulled me through a shattered passenger window when I was 16 and thought I knew every curve on a wet road. He had wrapped his jacket around me while my father ran a hand once, twice, 3 times over my hair without saying a word because his mouth wouldn't work. He had taught me to reverse into tight driveways, to find the turn on the dial where the radio static cleaned up just enough to catch a ball game. He brought lasagna in a dented pan the week my mother's heart went quiet and never let my father return the dish, claiming it tasted better with memories baked in. He had a laugh like gravel and a hand you felt safer for having on your shoulder. He was also, according to a message that crossed an evidence room and a grave, the man I was supposed to watch. I pressed the corner of the note to the glass and looked hard. The lens had caught Michael mid-turn, attention latching onto something out of frame. The light found the line of a small scar near his jaw, the one he got crawling under a chain-link fence on a case back when running had felt like flying to him. His hand rested loose against the back of my father's chair. There was a watch on his wrist with a face the size of a coin and a nick near the 2 o'clock mark. I knew that watch. He'd teased me once for noticing tiny things, and then he'd said that tiny things decide big ones. My father had smiled in that way he did when someone repeated him back without realizing it. I brought the frame into the kitchen and set it under the pendant light. Rain freckled the glass where I hadn't dried my hands. I took a dish towel and wiped it, slow, like cleaning might clear more than smudges. The envelope lay open beside it, the bureau seal ragged where I'd cut through. The chain of custody numbers stared up like a countdown that had finally reached 0. 2 months. My father had dropped this into a system he trusted to record truth and hold it until the right person arrived. Why not call me? Why not hand me the note and point to the picture himself? The answer sat inside the fact of that seal. He needed the letter tracked, logged, undeniable. He needed proof that what he sent existed before anyone could make it disappear. I turned the frame over. On the brown paper backing, the date was penciled in faintly. There was one other mark, almost erased by time and thumb, a single word my father would use when he didn't want to write a whole sentence: remember. I could hear how he said it. Not a command. Not a plea. A reminder that the past is a room we keep walking out of and back into, sometimes in the same hour. I took a photo of the photo with my phone and pinched to zoom on Michael's face until the pixels gave up their edges. He stared sideways, expression unreadable in freeze frame. Watch him, my father had written. Not blame him. Not fear him. Watch him. The difference mattered. Watching is patient. Watching leaves room for what you don't know yet. But the floor seemed to tilt, just a degree, the way hallway pictures do when no one's touched them. I steadied myself on the back of a chair and listened to the house breathe. My father used to say, trust what you see, and what someone tried to keep you from seeing. I looked again at the envelope. It had been somewhere it didn't belong before it got to me. Stopped. Processed. Released. A thing that had to survive a system designed to keep things still. I ran the pad of my thumb over the dried stamp ink and felt nothing change and everything lean one click closer to a truth I didn't want. Outside, the rain pulled back to a hush. The refrigerator motor clicked alive, steady as a metronome. I set the note beneath the glass of the frame, sliding it against the photo so the two sat together, paper over paper, his words facing the face he wanted me to see. I didn't decide anything in that moment. I didn't accuse or forgive. I stood and watched a man in a photograph stand behind my father's shoulder, and I let the small noises tell me what they could. Sleep didn't stick. I lay on the couch and watched the ceiling fan turn the dark into quarters until the quiet felt like a pressure cuff. At dawn I gave up and went to my father's desk. The top drawer still held his yellow legal pads, each sheet folded back on itself when he'd finished with a thought. On the third pad, halfway down, in his blocky print, Oak Night, not what the file says. Under it, a case number and a small square he'd drawn and shaded in, the way he used to mark things that didn't want to be seen. Oak Night. I said the words out loud to hear if they rang. They did. A place, not a date. My father named cases for where the harm began, not when. I opened the next drawer. Manila folders wore years like dust. Receipts. Impound slips. A photocopy of a property room log with his name typed neat and bland beside a line of numbers. At the bottom, a rubber stamp, State Bureau Annex, hold pending review. Someone had circled a shelf code in pencil, B4. In the margin, my father had written only this: if delayed, good. He had staged his own breadcrumb trail through a system that would timestamp every step. He had trusted an evidence room to outlast him. I powered up his old laptop. The fan coughed. The screen came with a password prompt and a hint I knew by heart, our street number, backward. His desktop was almost empty, just a folder on the left named, Bills, and another named, Mornings. Mornings held scans of his notebook pages, photos of cork boards, and a clipped article from the Graybridge Sentinel 10 years ago, local business owner found dead near Night Oak Park, witness vanishes. The photo was small, newsprint gray. Police tape bowed from one tree to another like a warning line in a children's game. 2 officers stood shoulder to shoulder behind it, heads turned the same way. My father, younger by a decade, jaw set. Beside him, a man with a gravel laugh I could hear in my head. Officer Michael Hart. The caption named them both. I told myself 100 reasons that photo meant nothing. He worked the same district. He showed up when the work needed bodies. He was a friend in the way cops are friends when a thing goes bad and someone needs to stand in the wind with you. Still, on my father's scan of the article, a faint underline ran under Michael's name. Not all the way. Just enough to ask a question. I checked the case number against the state's public docket. The Oak Night file had an open status and no recent activity. The summary said 1 suspect questioned, released. No charges. Witness unlocated. The notes field ended with a date from years ago and the kind of language that looks like progress if you don't know how to read it. Referred. Continued. Pending. My father hated those words. He called them polite closets. I should have called Michael. That was the script that fit the history we had. You share the weight. You compare notes. You decide what to do next together. But the letter had come through a seal designed to keep people honest. Watch him, my father had written. Not trust. Not warn. Watch. The difference held its own weight. I closed the laptop and listened for the sound that told me if I was about to do something I couldn't undo. All I heard was the refrigerator motor and a bird testing the morning. I packed a small bag. Jeans. A jacket with a hood. The legal pad page with Oak Night torn clean and folded into my wallet. I took a photo of the property receipt and the shelf code. Before I left, I did one more thing. I opened the settings on my phone and turned off location sharing to the one person who still had it, Michael. We had set it up the week after my mother died when he worried I was walking too far at night just to hear a world that wasn't a hospital. He had never abused it. He had never needed to. That was the point. I turned it off and felt disloyal to both of us. Graybridge sits an hour and a half west if the traffic lets you, 2 if it doesn't. The highway cut through hills still slick from last night's rain. My father always kept a travel mug of coffee with a lid that whistled if you poured too fast. I stopped for gas and poured too fast on purpose, just to hear it. The town sign looked smaller than it had 10 years ago. Or maybe I was larger and nothing had bothered to tell me. The precinct sat on a corner with a brick face the color of dried blood and windows that held the morning light like breath. There was a plaque out front with names engraved and a bench where people left flowers when the job took someone home the hard way. I kept walking. Inside, the lobby had the same bulletin board with the same curl of a flyer for a pancake breakfast that had happened 2 months ago. The woman at the desk looked up like people do when they can place your face but not your name. I'm here for personal effects, I said. Richard Brooks. He passed. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. You were here a lot when he consulted. You look like him around the eyes. She checked a list. Most of his things were cleared last week to his estate. If there's anything left, it would be over at the State Bureau Annex. They've been consolidating. She slid a paper across for me to sign and circled an address with a pink highlighter that smelled like strawberry candy. As I stepped back onto the sidewalk, a cruiser rolled through the intersection slow. The driver's profile was all angles I knew. Michael glanced toward the building, then away, then back, like he had felt a thread tug. I moved behind a pillar without dramatics, the way people do when rain starts up and they don't want to admit it. He parked farther down, cut the engine, and took a call. I watched his hand lift, his fingers pinch the bridge of his nose, the habitual way he steered his patience. The weight in my chest shifted. Loyalty isn't a blindfold. It's a promise to let the truth come all the way to the door before you open it. I walked to a diner 2 blocks over and took a booth with a view of the precinct. The waitress called me honey and put coffee down before I asked, because some kindnesses don't need permission. I checked the bureau annex hours. Open until 5. I checked the bus schedule in case I didn't want my car to be a line someone could draw between 2 points on a map. I paid cash. My father used to say paper leaves a quieter trail. By noon I had a cheap room at the Maple Court, the kind of motel where the air conditioner hums in one note and the bedspread prints don't match the curtains. I locked the door, set my bag under the window, and lined up what I had on the small table by the lamp, the copied receipt, the shelf code, the underlined article, the photo of Michael's half-smile behind my father's shoulder. The plan was not elegant. Go to the annex. Ask for what I could ask for as next of kin. See what lived on shelf before. The plan didn't need elegance. It needed to happen. I sent one text to no one whose name I was ready to say aloud. I typed it into a draft addressed to myself and saved it where I could find it fast, Annex B4. If I don't check in by 6, call Agent Cole, card in Dad's blue wallet. I slid my father's old business card for Special Agent Nathan Cole from the wallet and touched the embossed numbers like Braille. I hadn't called him. Not yet. Watching, my father had said. Do that first. The room settled around me. Outside, a truck downshifted and a dog barked once at the insult of it. I lay back on the bedspread and stared at the ceiling. The paint had cracked in a line that looked like a river on a map, wide at one end, narrow at the other. If you turned your head just right, it pointed west, toward a building with gray shelves and a box with my father's name on it, waiting for the person he had trusted to show up. I didn't pray. I counted the seconds between the air conditioner's cycles and listened for small noises that tell the truth. When the unit clicked off and the room went soft, I got up, picked up the keys, and went to meet whatever was on that shelf. The State Bureau Annex sat at the edge of an industrial park where the buildings all looked related and none of them wanted to be remembered. Inside, the air was cool and dry in the way of rooms that are paid to keep stories from rotting. A security camera blinked a red dot above the sign-in desk. The clerk wore a badge on a lanyard and the expression of someone who had learned to be polite without promising anything. I gave my name, my father's, and slid across a photocopy of the letter from his attorney confirming next of kin. She scanned it, the machine making that soft zipper sound as it pulled the page through. Paper clipped to paper. Time clipped to time. What are you here for today? She asked. Personal effects and any materials released from his consults, I said, like I belonged to the sentence. There's a property receipt with a shelf code. B4. Her eyebrows lifted a degree that said I had done some homework. She typed. The monitor's glow lit the silver in her hair. We did an internal audit last month, she said. A number of items were held pending review. Some have been cleared. She glanced at me over the screen. Your father's file shows an envelope mailed out. She tapped a line that had my address beside a date that matched the postmark. There's also a digital media sleeve logged, not yet picked up. Viewable on site only. Can I see it? You can request supervised viewing, she said. No phones in the lab. We can provide you a notepad and a copy of the chain of custody log. You'll need to sign for time in and time out. She slid a form across. The paper smelled faintly of toner and lemon cleaner. I signed. She handed me a visitor badge that clipped to my collar and a strip of blue tape with my last name written in Sharpie for the evidence tech to stick on any folders that passed through my hands. She buzzed me through a heavy door that closed like a bank vault, trying not to brag. The corridor beyond was quiet except for the hum of dehumidifiers and the soft thud of my own pulse. The tech who met me introduced himself as Torres and wore nitrile gloves the color of a winter sky. He led me into a viewing room that had a table, 2 chairs bolted to the floor, and a terminal with a card reader and a watermark that would stamp every frame with the time and my badge number. He set a legal pad and a pencil in front of me, as if I might forget how to remember without the proper tools. "Your father checked this in himself," Torres said, laying a small, clear evidence sleeve on the table. "Digital media, micro SD card, itemized under a consult note, placed on hold while IA looked into related chain of possession irregularities. Cleared for supervised viewing only." He pointed to the log. "I read the entries because that is how you touch things you're not allowed to touch, passive." Witness. The date my father had walked this card into this building. The date an auditor moved it from one gray shelf to another. The date it was released to view but not to leave. 2 initials I didn't recognize. Torres's signature. And then the empty line waiting for mine. The card itself looked like nothing. Black plastic, a bite-sized corner missing by design. On its label, in my father's block print, 2 words and a number, Oak Night 4. Torres slotted it into the reader. The monitor woke to a blue screen, then a directory with 4 files, each with the same prefix, on _SE_01 through 04. He opened the 4th. The watermark appeared in the top left, a ghost reminding us we were not alone in the room. The video filled the screen. Night turned the world into shapes. The camera had been set back from a service road that ran along the southeast edge of Night Oak Park, pointed between 2 trees where underbrush thinned into a path. Rain fell in the way it always does on video, like white noise given form. The timestamp read 2:13. Headlights slid through leaves and died. For a long beat, nothing. Then 2 figures entered the frame from the right. One moved like a man who knew where his feet were. The other moved like a person trying to place their feet where someone else had. The taller man wore a jacket with reflective piping that caught and tossed the rain. The shorter figure wore a hood and kept looking toward the road as if the car might call them back. The audio was thin, wind and water and the occasional metallic tick. Then a voice cut through, low, close to the microphone, as if the person holding the camera had leaned forward without meaning to. "Step off the path," the taller man said. The words weren't a threat. They were what someone says when they assume obedience. A second later, "We'll be quick." I felt the sound in my spine. Not the words. The cadence. The small drop in pitch on quick. The way the mouth softens on wheel as if rounding a corner. There are 100 men who speak like that. There are very few you've heard say your name the night your mother's heart went quiet. I gripped the pencil too hard and it clicked, lead snipping off clean. Torres pretended not to notice. The taller man took the hooded figure by the elbow and guided them off the main trail toward the dark between trees. They passed within a bright splash of the camera's IR and the lens found details it could live with. The taller man's profile flashed. Square jaw. A thin line near the hinge. A small pale arc no bigger than a fingernail, like an old Nick that never tanned. A watch face at his wrist caught the light once, the glass winking hard then gone. The hooded figure looked up. Their face pixelated into anonymity. They hesitated. The taller man spoke again, softer now. The microphone didn't catch the words, but my memory supplied the tone, the way cops talk to people at the edge of a decision. Encouragement braided with hurry. The clip ran another 21 seconds. The figures angled out of frame. Rain rode over where they had been. The video ended in a sudden square of black, as if the camera had decided it had seen enough. Torres clicked to the 3rd file. Similar vantage point. A different hour. Empty trail, just wind and water stitching the trees together. He clicked the second, then the first. Nothing. He paused on the directory screen, then on the log again. Trail cam? I asked. Looks like a consumer model modified for low light, Torres said. Your father brought it and labeled as recovered from Night Oak Southeast Access. Documentation says source confidential. That's as much as I'm allowed to say. Can I get a still? My voice was steadier than my hands. Of the profile. And the watch. I can print watermarked frames for your file, he said. They can't leave the building except as part of the estate record. You can review them here. He clicked back into the clip, scrubbed to the flash where the jawline and watch came clean, and froze it. The printer hummed behind us, a dry little progress bar in the air. The still came warm and thin. The watermark washed over the corner like a diagonal bruise. Viewing copy, Annex, 10:24 a.m. The face in profile was a compromise between light and doubt. You could see what you wanted to see if you brought it with you. You could also stop yourself. I traced the outline in the air above the page without touching it. The nick near the jaw sat where I remembered. The watch face had a tiny flaw near the 2 o'clock mark, a chip he'd joked about at a barbecue years ago, tapping the glass with a knuckle and saying, 2 o'clock's my blind spot. My father had laughed in that soft way he reserved for people who thought they were telling him something new. It's not enough, I said, mostly to the room. It's a lead, Torres said, which in here meant both less and more than it meant anywhere else. He printed the chain of custody log and slid it into a folder with my name written in blue tape. I signed the line for timeout. The pen scratched loud in the quiet. He removed the card from the reader, resealed it in its sleeve, and pressed the seam down with a flat tool that clicked twice, like a seatbelt. He placed the sleeve into a gray bin with other stories that were waiting their turn. Why was the letter to me kept? I asked. Why not send it when he brought it? Internal review, he said. When there's a question about how something came in, or who touched it first, everything in the related bag gets frozen until someone with authority says thaw. After audit, cleared items go out. The mail's not fast when it moves through this room. My father had wanted a clock he didn't control to stamp his message. He had put his note in a place where people who didn't know him would be forced to say it existed. He had walked a little camera into the same system and trusted it to count who opened it and when. He had planned for a future in which he couldn't stand over anyone's shoulder and point. Back in the lobby, the clerk returned my visitor badge and slid the folder to me across the counter. You can review those here any time during business hours, she said. If you add anything to the record, let us know. Outside, the heat hit like a hand pressed flat. The parking lot shimmered and a lawn crew somewhere made the steady whine of a two-stroke engine. I sat in my car and stared at the still until the watermark seemed to pulse. The photo didn't tell me what to think. It asked me what I would do when the next thing I saw sharpened the outline. Watching is patient, my father had written without writing. I folded the print and slid it into the glove compartment, where people keep registrations, napkins, and evidence of who they've been. Then I started the engine and let the air blow cold until my breathing matched its pace. The air from the car vents ran cold enough to steady my hands. I stared at the watermark still until the ghost letters stopped pulsing, folded it once, slid it into the glove box, and watched the lot until my breathing matched the hum of the fan. I didn't call Agent Cole. I didn't call anyone. I thumbed through my contacts until Michael's name lit the screen and typed a line I could live with. Coffee. 2 blocks from the precinct. My treat. He answered in a minute. 10. I chose a table against the mirror so I could watch the door without turning my head. The waitress set coffee down with a slice of lemon pie like she'd decided sugar was the only legal medicine left. The bell over the door chirped twice. Michael came in with his jacket unzipped, eyes doing a quick count of exits the way he's done since I've known him. He spotted me and smiled the kind of tired smile people wear when they've been to more funerals than weddings for a while. He touched my shoulder the way you test a fragile hinge. Then he sat. I would have come to the house, he said. Didn't want to crowd. You know how it is. I do, I said. Thanks for the lasagna last week. The joke between us sat with us for a heartbeat and then didn't. He ordered coffee and waved off the pie. Up close, the small nick near his jaw caught the diner light the way it did in the still, a thin, pale crescent that never quite tanned. His watch face flashed once when he reached for the cup. There was the chip near 2 o'clock, small as a misplaced glitter, forever stuck in 1 hour. They're clearing your dad's consult files, he said, casual on the surface. Annex has been busy. Is that right? I asked, equally casual. I was there this morning. His eyes shifted, not in guilt, not yet. In inventory. Ah, he said. I would have given you a heads up. Paper rooms can be unforgiving. I prefer them unforgiving, I said. They remember. He nodded like the remark was neutral. He looked tired. Lines at the corners of his eyes were deeper than 2 months ago. He took a long drink and set the cup down without a clink. How are you, really? Grieving keeps changing its shape, I said. I keep bumping into it. He let that live in the air for a beat and then gently nudged the conversation toward safer ground. Weather. The precinct's new captain. A joke about how the coffee here could strip paint and pride. I watched how he spoke. Where he left room. Where he didn't. I waited until his guard felt like muscle memory and then placed the single word on the table like a coin. Oak. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He breathed. Night Oak, I said. I was looking at old articles. Weird how a thing stays open and also disappears. Bureaucracy loves a file that feeds itself, he said, rolling the cup between his palms. Lot of noise. Not a lot of signal. North Gate, I said. Was that where the witness went missing? He set the cup down and a small, almost inaudible click escaped the saucer. North Gate's the picnic end, he said without looking at me. Not much cover. If I were a witness, I wouldn't choose it. A fragment of a smile, there and gone. Southeast has less lighting. Tracks run close. Kids used to drink there. Less patrol. I nodded as if we were two people swapping harmless local trivia. It took a second for him to hear himself. When he did, his face didn't change. His hand did. The fingers stopped rolling the cup. Then they started again. Used to, he added. Before they changed the patrol grid. My father's handwriting sat in my head, looked behind my shoulder. Watch him. I told Michael about the funeral flowers piling up like bad metaphors. I thanked him for the folded flag he'd carried when my father retired and made a joke about how he'd almost dropped it on his own boot. He laughed, gravel soft, and he said, "We'll be quick," when the waitress asked if we wanted refills. The words landed wrong in my bones. The same cadence as the rain-soaked voice on the video when someone led someone else off a path. It could have been coincidence. It could have been 100 men on 100 nights. I heard it anyway. IA says they might reopen Oak if anything new shows, I lied, letting the sentence find its own speed. Maybe even pull footage from the north side. IA says a lot, he answered. He wiped a ring of coffee with his thumb, neatening the world by a centimeter. If they had anything, they'd have knocked before you texted. Trust me. He lifted his eyes, let the weight of our history do work for him, and added, "You don't need this, kid." He hadn't called me kid in years. Not since the night he slipped his jacket over my shoulders and my father paced a ditch counting breaths. Not since I grew into the habit of counting my own. The word tried to pull me back to a simpler hallway. I didn't let it. I let it pass and leave a draft. Maybe I don't, I said. But he did. We all did, he said. Sometimes the justice you can live with isn't the justice you wanted. He checked his watch as if to confirm time was still behaving. You staying long? Want me to swing by the house later, help sort the, boxes? Maybe, I said. I've got a few errands. I folded cash under the sugar caddy and stood. He stood too, out of habit. He reached as if to squeeze my shoulder again and checked himself into a nod. He smiled the old smile and walked me to the door. Outside, the sky had that flat white look that means the weather hasn't decided. I chose a route I didn't normally choose. Not fast. Not obvious. I watched reflections instead of mirrors. A black SUV idled at the corner with a parking tag clipped to the visor and a cracked plastic license frame that said Harlan Motor Group. It pulled out after I passed and took the lane behind me. I turned right. It turned right. I went around the block once, twice, 3 times, 3 rights that should bring anyone anywhere back where they started. The SUV did all of them. Maybe it was nothing. People live patterns. Maybe it was something. Patterns also live people. At the pharmacy I swung into a spot near the door, stepped inside, and let the cool, chemical air convince my face I had a prescription to pick up. I stood near the greeting cards and pretended to debate between sympathy and blank. The SUV idled in the lot. The engine's low note vibrated the glass whenever the automatic doors opened. I bought a roll of tape I did not need. When I came out, the SUV slid forward and then back, as if testing the leash. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. No name. No thread. 1 line. Stop looking. Another followed before I could pull up the keypad. Or you'll follow him. The words were simple. They were also the kind of simple that has to work hard. I didn't look over my shoulder. I let my face do nothing and my feet keep doing what they were doing. I crossed the lot, put the tape in the passenger seat as if that were the only reason I had come, and drove 3 blocks to a hardware store where the window reflected the street clean as a mirror. The SUV passed, slowed, and kept going. I waited until the light changed twice. It didn't come back. In the motel lot the AC units clattered like a string of tin cans on Newlywed's bumper. I locked the room, then locked it again, slid the safety chain because ritual helps. I set the tape on the table next to the still, next to the copied receipt, next to the page that said Oak Night in my father's hand. I thought about calling Agent Cole. My thumb hovered over the number. The letter in the evidence bag lived behind my eyes, watch him. Not warn. Not run. Watch. Patience isn't passive. It's choosing a seat and staying in it until the thing you're waiting for shows itself with its own legs. I texted myself again, because sometimes that's the only honest place to put a thought you're not ready to speak. Diner. SUV. Harlan frame. Unknown number, stop looking. I slid the phone under the motel Bible the way people used to hide money, not because it needed hiding but because the act said I was keeping something safe. Outside, a siren lifted and fell. Somewhere a door closed too hard. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to small noises tell me what they could. Then I stood, put on the jacket with the hood, and picked a route that wouldn't look like a route at all. The plan was simple and wrong. Go where the answers weren't offered. Find the place he wouldn't want me to be. If justice was going to change its shape again, I wanted to be there when it did. Night made the precinct glass a mirror. I watched my reflection line up with the lobby until the cleaning crew's cart rolled past and the security guard at the front desk set his coffee down to sign for a delivery that needed 2 hands. On the side entrance, the keycard reader blinked a slow green, sleeping. I waited for the door to sigh open on a smoke break and slipped in behind a woman in scrubs with a badge that had yesterday's date on it. She held the door with an elbow, eyes on her phone, and I made myself smaller than the gap and let the latch catch behind us without a sound. Hallways after hours hum differently. Vending machines talk to themselves. Radios murmur behind closed doors. The air held the mix of floor wax and gun oil that always makes a police station feel both orderly and dangerous. Michael's office sat halfway down the south corridor, 3 doors past the squad room. The glass had been frosted up to eye level since the time someone threw a punch through it on a Friday, long before either of us grew cautious. The knob wouldn't turn. I stood still until the hallway noise told me it was safe to move, then kept moving. The janitor's closet smelled like bleach and pine. A ring of keys hung from a hook behind the door, too heavy for one set of hands. Among them, a laminated tab read temp access. Someone had clipped it off and left it on the shelf like an extra thought. I set my phone's flashlight to the lowest setting, pressed the light against my palm so it only bled between fingers, and read the dull print on the back. South Corridor. Offices 212 to 220. Michael's door was 218. I breathed once for the line I was about to cross and took the badge. My father would have called it borrowing until it wasn't. The reader at 218 chirped polite and turned green. Inside, the air ran cooler, conditioned for paper. Citrus cleaner hung under everything like someone had tried to erase what work really smells like. His jacket slouched over the back of the chair, a habit he'd never killed, ready to go, the way he liked to tell the world who he was without saying a word. On the desk, an in-tray held expense reports and a coffee-stained map of the county. What I needed wasn't on the surface. It never is. The file cabinet fought me with a lock designed to stop hurried thieves, not careful daughters. The top drawer gave a millimeter when I put the letter opener's blade into the seam and leaned the way my father taught me to lean, no force, just patience. 1 notch, 2. A soft click, like a small animal deciding not to run. Folders sat in rows with tabs that pretended to be neutral. Training rosters. Vehicle logs. Community outreach. Behind them, not alphabetized, a banker's envelope with a red string and a marker scrawl that wasn't departmental, N.O. Press. The string whispered when it unwound. 8x10 slid into my hands one after another, black and white printed on thin semi-gloss, the way old school officers still like to lay a case out on a table. Night Oak. Southeast access. Tape sagging between oaks. Boot prints in wet soil captured at angles like arguments. On one close-up, the tread came sharp, a hex pattern with one lug missing near the outside heel, the absence itself a signature. In the corner, my father's handwriting had printed a line you could hear him speak, VASR, 9 Sol, note missing outer lug, XREF training photo 6 of 15. The note didn't accuse. It connected. He had annotated a tread type and the detail that made it unique. I saw Michael propping his boot on a diner stool this morning, the tiny gap chewed out by years of stepping into the same side of curbs. The photo did not say his name. It did not have to, yet. The next sheet snapped gently as I turned it. Telephoto grain, long lens compressing distance until the woods looked nearer than they had any right to be. My father stood at the tree line, turned slightly, head angled like he'd heard something behind him and decided to pretend he hadn't. The caption strip at the bottom, someone had run these through a printer that still thought it was 2009, read R. Brooks, SE Access, 309. The angle told its own story, whoever took this was watching the watcher. In the lower right, out of focus, ghosted in a crescent, the edge of a car window intruded just enough to confess proximity. You don't stumble into a frame like that. You sit and make yourself part of the dark. Paper hid more paper. Under the photos, a thin folder labeled OAK, admin, inside, photocopies of 2 bank deposit slips, numbers blacked by the copier's tired toner until they looked like redactions. In the memo line on one, someone had handwritten HMG retainer cleared. HMG. The license frame on the SUV that rode my bumper all afternoon read Harlan Motor Group in cracked chrome. People don't usually spell bribes, they launder them through abbreviations they can live with. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was only a trail with no end. The deposits were 8 years old, logged 1 week before the Sentinel ran the story of a business owner dead at Night Oak and a witness who disappeared. Footsteps passed the door and paused. A key tested a lock somewhere down the hall. The radio on someone's shoulder hissed a name and a shrug. I pressed the folder flat with both hands to keep it from crackling and counted the breaths it takes for a person to decide a door is just a door. The footsteps moved on. I put the papers back in the order I'd found them, turned the stack so the dog-eared corner matched the dust's memory, and slid the banker's envelope under the cover files. I took pictures fast, screen brightness down, shutter sound off, one photo of the tread, one of the deposit slip with HMG in the margin, one of my father at the tree line catching a sound he couldn't place. The phone made no noise. I made the sign of putting nothing in my pockets and checked my hands, empty. A narrow drawer to the right of the desk stuck halfway. Inside, a coil-bound notepad lay face down, the last page torn clean in a way that promised it hadn't wanted to leave. In the paper dust that clung to the glue, an impression wrote itself backward. I turned the pad sideways and slid a pencil over the page until the grooves rose into legible ghosts. The letters came up one by one as if reluctant, COLE, 9A, DONT. Beneath it, B4. My father had reached through the room with a habit we shared and left a message only pressure could find. It wasn't new information. It was proof another set of eyes had stood right here and tried to make sense of the same lines. He had contacted Agent Cole. He had planned to meet him at 9. He hadn't made it. The shelf code, my shelf code, sat there like a confirmation stamp, as if he wanted me to know I was walking the same floor, in the same shoes, with the same map. The doorknob moved a quarter inch and stopped, as if whoever owned the hand on the other side had thought better of trying. I eased the notepad back, lint and all. I rewound the red string on the envelope and felt it bite the cardboard like a stitch. The temp badge clicked green on the way out. The hallway sounded louder now, like a river after you've heard the stone you were sitting on shift. I hung the badge back on the hook in the closet exactly where the heat mark said it had lived and wiped the door's brass with the inside of my sleeve because rituals calm hands. Outside, the night made the precinct glass another mirror. My face looked like someone else's for a second before it looked like mine again. In the car, the photos glowed in the phone's dark like contraband light. None of it was enough by itself. Together, the pieces started to lean toward the same corner. A tread that matched a habit. A deposit that wore an abbreviation I had seen in Chrome. A long lens pointed at a man who had been teaching me how to look my whole life. I didn't feel victorious. I felt the quiet that comes before a shape steps out of trees you've been staring at and admits it has legs. My father had decided not to accuse in ink. He had chosen to watch. He had left me a way to do the same. I turned the phone face down, let the screen go dark, and listened to the small noises tell me what they could, the seatbelt's settling sigh, the engine's low idle, the thud of my own pulse counting down to the moment when watching would no longer be enough. Night had the park to itself. The southeast access lot held 2 sodium lights and a puddle that remembered the last rain. I parked under the dimmer lamp and texted Michael like it was a favor to both of us. I found something of Dad's out at Night Oak. Need your eyes. 10 minutes, he wrote back. We'll be quick. Before he arrived, I sent one other message. A single pin to a single number. Agent Cole. Live location on. A line of text beneath it, meeting MH at SE access now. If I stop moving, call me. If I don't answer, come. I put my phone in my jacket pocket with the screen dark and the recorder running. I touched the frame that holds a microphone as if I were checking the time. Gravel popped under tires. Headlights cut across trees and died. Michael stepped out with his jacket zipped and his hands empty. He looked like work at night has always looked, alert, tired, certain. You okay? He asked. His voice carried easy across the open. You sounded wired. Grief keeps changing its face, I said. Walk with me. We took the path where the brush thins toward the service road. The air held the smell of wet leaves and creosote. He let me set the pace. His boots found the old ruts without looking. Small noises did what they do at night, told the truth in pieces. A cricket under a leaf. A train farther off than it sounded. The click of a watch crystal on a zipper when a wrist swings just so. I went to the annex, I said. They had a card. 4 clips. One showed 2 people on this path. 2:13 in the morning. Southeast side. He kept his eyes on the ground in front of us. Cards show a lot, he said. Enough to get people to say things they can't unsay. Not enough to live on in court. You've seen it, I said, plain. He didn't trip, didn't flinch. I know the kind of thing it would show if someone said it right, he said. SE used to be a blind spot. City never put the second light in. Cheaper to change patrols than poles. He let the sentence go too far and heard it. Used to, he added, softer. I stopped where the trees pinched the trail narrower and turned to face him. The path made us the same distance from the lot and the dark. He stood where my father had stood in that still photo, shoulder turned, jaw lit just enough to make the old nick show like a pale comma. Dad mailed me a note, I said. Evidence seal. He told me where to look. He didn't write your name. He didn't have to. He exhaled once through his nose, the way he used to when traffic gave him a lane he didn't trust. Anna, he said, and the way he said my name pulled on old chords. You don't want this. I want the truth, I said. I want to know why a man who taught me to read small noises ended up under dirt while a friend stood behind his shoulder and stayed quiet. He glanced toward the service road and back. The habit of counting exits didn't leave him. The truth is messy when it's late, he said. People make trades so towns can sleep. Your father understood that better than anyone. You made trades with Harlan, I said. You took a retainer. You walked a witness off this path and told them it would be quick. His face didn't move. His voice did. You think I did that, he said. You think I put hands on a scared kid and... You said the words the man in the video said, I cut in, because if I left it to build it would never stop. You knew there was no second light. You knew about SE before I did. You left a tread with a lug missing in wet soil because you step off the same side of curbs. You parked a car with a Harlan frame on my bumper and hoped I would think patterns are just daily life. I watched you, because he told me to. Silence held for a full breath, as if the trees had leaned in to hear what kind of night this would be. He took one small step closer. His voice went to the register cops use when they talk people down from edges. I pulled you out of glass, he said. I wrapped a jacket around you while your father's mouth forgot how to speak. I have carried your family when you didn't know you were heavy. You're standing here because I did what had to be done for a lot of years so you could sleep. Then say you didn't, I said. Say you weren't in that frame. Say you weren't at 2:13 on this trail. He looked past me, into the dark where the path drops a foot and turns sharp. Some people need to disappear for things to stay together, he said, and there it was. Not the confession a courtroom wants. The truth a night gives. He reached slow toward my jacket as if to steady me. His eyes flicked once to the pocket where the phone sat. He saw it. He understood what small red dots on screens mean. He moved fast. I moved sooner. I turned and ran into the narrow, where brush slaps the shins and roots wait under leaves. My lungs stung cold. Gravel slid. His boots pounded the ruts I missed. He didn't shout my name. He didn't tell me to stop. He breathed and closed distance like men who run toward trouble learn to do. The train's horn sounded once, closer now, a low animal in the ribs. I cut left where the fence sags, hand on wire, shoulder through a gap that bit cloth and skin. His jacket snagged longer. The second he lost was the second I needed. Sirens rose in the not far distance, two tones twisted together. Headlights hit the lot and fanned out white. I stumbled into cinders, palms stinging, and turned because running without a direction is just fear wearing shoes. "Police," a voice shouted, not his. "Hands where we can see them." Floodlight hammered the trees flat. I saw Michael lift his hands halfway, then think better and go for his pocket. He wasn't reaching for a gun. He was reaching for my phone, his palm out, as if undoing the last 30 seconds could put the night back where it belonged. Two beams pinned him. A third washed over me and held. Tires ground. Doors slammed. The cut of a command tone found the air. "Michael Hart," another voice called, steady as a transcript. "Agent Nathan Cole. Hands up. Now." Michael's head turned to the sound like a man waking up into a room he thought he knew. He lifted both arms clean and slow and looked at me with something that wasn't anger. It wasn't regret either. It was a tiredness that came from paying a price he had decided on when he was a different man. "I kept it quiet," he said, "not loud, not soft. For you. For him. For all of us." Then he let the lights take his face apart. Zip-tie whisper. Footsteps on cinder. A hand on my elbow that belonged to a man with gray at his temple and a voice I recognized from my father's old phone. "You did right," Cole said. "You stayed alive." I nodded because words would have broken in my mouth. The recorder in my pocket had caught breath and sentence and the sound of a choice being made too late. The night settled by degrees. The small noises kept talking. Gravel ticking under boots. Radio static saying clear. Far off, the train rolled past and did not stop. The paperwork took longer than the night. Statements. Waivers. A plastic cup of water that tasted like the cup. Agent Cole recorded my account twice, once for the file and once for the part of the file that ends up in rooms with no windows. He let me hold my phone while he copied the audio and the timestamps, the way a good man holds out both hands at once so nobody has to let go. When I finally walked out into morning, the sky was the color of a bruise turning the corner toward yellow. I drove back to the motel on streets that felt wider than they had 8 hours ago, slept for 3, and woke to a silence that didn't push on my ribs. Watching had stopped being enough. Now everything would be written down. Cole called mid-afternoon. He didn't talk like televisions teach federal agents to talk. He told me what he could say and left alone what he couldn't. Michael was in holding. The county would process charges after the Bureau finished its part. The Oak Knight file was reopening with additional information of probative value, which is the long way to say someone finally listened to small noises. He asked if I wanted victim services numbers. I told him I wanted a minute to remember how to stand in my own kitchen without bracing for a knock. He said that counted. He said my father had been a stubborn man for good reasons and a few bad ones and laughed once in the way people do when agreement costs them nothing. A week can go by fast when you fill it with forms. Friends dropped casseroles at the house, each with reheating instructions attached like prayers. I stacked them in the freezer and kept one in the oven too long because grief and timer bells run on different clocks. I washed the coffee mug he always forgot on the porch rail. I put his jacket on a chair and did not move it. The photograph with the scuffed corner stayed under the kitchen light. Every night I slid the note back under the glass and every morning I slid it out, as if the paper needed air to keep saying what it said. On the 8th day, the doorbell rang the way it rings when the person on the other side has come to the right house on purpose. A courier in a navy vest held out a flat package the size of a book and asked for a signature. The envelope carried weight that wasn't paper. Law offices ran along the top in a font that had never taken a day off. The seal on the back wasn't the Bureau's this time, it was a gold circle pressed into red wax that had cooled a week ago and then been told to wait. My name sat in my father's hand again, steady where it could be, tired where it had to be. I broke the wax with my thumbnail, careful, and slid out a letter and a photograph. The photo was printed on heavy matte, not the thin drugstore gloss. A girl sat on a man's shoulders, hands in his hair, both of them looking off to where someone was making a face so they would laugh. Me and my father at a summer fair that smelled like fried batter and sawdust. Behind us, leaning into frame, a younger man making sure we both stayed upright while a crowd pressed. Michael. Not a blur yet. A person. The past is impolite that way. It keeps everyone in the room at once. The letter was 2 pages. My father wrote like he always wrote, equal parts instrument and voice. He told me the thing I already knew and the thing I didn't want repeated out loud, because the shape of a truth changes when it sits on paper. He said he'd held back because he didn't have enough to stand on, and because a man who has already fallen once doesn't push the person standing beside him if there's a chance they'll go over, too. He wrote Michael's name once, then crossed it out, and then wrote it again so the record would have to choose which line to believe. He wrote that he put the first note through the evidence room because he didn't want any human kindness between him and the postman to be the reason it never arrived. If you're reading this, it's because the world did what I asked and outlasted me, he wrote. There are trades decent people make so towns can sleep, and sometimes the trade is you. I made the wrong one once. I tried to make the right one after. When you were 16 and he pulled you out of glass, I owed the kind of debt that makes a man generous with his blind spots. A debt like that needs paying off with daylight, not silence. I waited too long. Don't carry that part. He told a story I had never heard. A night he and Michael had walked the perimeter of a flood zone where people were throwing possessions into the backs of trucks like failing prayers. A man with a brown duffel had pressed cash into Michael's hand to let a cousin's car go through the closed lane and Michael had pushed it back hard enough to make the bills scatter. 2 years later another man with another bag and a different promise had tried again. The second time, my father wrote, the money didn't hit the ground. The third time, a witness who knew the difference between favors and bribes went for a walk and didn't make it home. He didn't absolve or condemn. He put words on a scale and let the reader watch them balance. There was a meeting with Cole at 9, he wrote in a margin, as if remembering he hadn't told me something and deciding not to hide it. I left a mark you would know. If you found it, you are where you need to be. He finished with the only thing he'd ever refused to give me quickly, instruction. He said, do not become a version of me that mistakes patience for kindness or anger for courage. Watching is not waiting. It is choosing not to lie to yourself while you look. If this has cost you something, sleep, friends, the shape of a history, set the bill on my desk. I would pay it if I could. I set the letter on the table and put the photo beside it. I touched the crease between his words and the picture with one finger and felt the seam where story meets proof. The fridge motor clicked on, steady as a metronome, and the house exhaled like a person who has been holding their breath too long without noticing. Outside, a neighbor's sprinklers ticked in a slow arc across a lawn too green for August. Small noises doing what they do. Cole called that evening and told me what the day had done to the case. The charge sheet was thick where it used to be thin. The stills, the audio, the tread, the deposits, the camera's ghost. None of it sang alone. Together they made a choir you couldn't talk over. He didn't promise verdicts. He promised movement. I thanked him for standing where my father couldn't and he told me that my father had stood there for more people than I would ever meet. We let the line go quiet until courtesy required words and then we used them. When the street went blue and then gray and then the color of a TV left on in another room, I took the old scuffed frame down and slid the letter under the glass behind the photo. Words behind the face that asked for them. I hung the frame the way my father liked it, with a lean you notice if you pay attention. On the counter, I set his badge in the little wooden box that used to keep paperclips and things you can never find when you need them. I closed the lid and listened to the click as if it were a door. The puddle on the sidewalk had shrunk to an oval that held sky. I stood at the window and watched clouds pass through it like a movie playing on the ground. Somewhere, a train called the hour to anyone who kept time that way. I didn't pray. I named the noises. The house, the sprinkler, the whistle, the hum. I said them in my head the way you say the names of people you've loved. And then I turned off the kitchen light and let the frame keep leaning, because some things should always ask to be seen twice.